you there? Okay. I'm just giving everyone a chance to get let into the room, and then we'll kick off. We have Afsa here from Essential Media. She's going to help us with any technical stuff. So if you get caught out, try to chat to Afsa. Afsa, do we have everybody here now, do you think?
We have about 26 people.
Okay. Okay, well, it's lovely to see you all here. Some of you I know, so it's great to see you, and welcome to everybody else as well. So this session's about the role that employment services could play in realising full employment. But we premise that idea on the idea that reform is needed because of the amount of money that goes into the employment services system, and because we believe there are better ways of running those programs than the ones we have now. And as Emma just said before, they don't actually help people get jobs. And I know there's some people on this webinar who probably disagree with that very generalised statement. So I do say it with some caveats around it. Before I introduce the Brains Trust we've assembled for this session, I wanted to mention the work that we've already begun on employment services reform at Per Capita. So there's two reports in production or have just been published. One was called Redesigning Employment Services, and another one on mutual obligation should be published in about a week. And broadly in those reports, we've identified the problems with employment services stemming from the rampant marketisation and increasingly punitive activation approach we've seen develop in economic and social policy over the last 20 years. Now that we have a huge wave of unemployment caused by the COVID economic shock, there is a need to make employment service reform part of the national conversation about recovery. So in this session, we'll hear from three panelists who have a wealth of experience. In putting the session together, I asked them to think about the top 5 things that are good and bad about employment services. They've been given the challenge of talking about their take on those top 5 things in about 5 minutes each. On this panel, Lisa Folks. Hi, Lisa. Just sound checking with you. Yep. Lisa's there. Lisa is the Director of Employment at Social Ventures Australia and has held a number of senior roles in employment services agencies. She has also engaged in research about the Community Development Program. Then we will hear from May Lamb. Hi, May.
Hi.
May has had long involvement in the employment services field and a range of roles in social services design and innovation. After that, we'll hear from David O'Halloran. Hey, David.
Hello.
Hey there. David is from Monash University. Before commencing his PhD there, he had nearly 3 decades experience in disability services in Australia and overseas. We are then going to turn to some discussion about the need for making employment services more person-centred, or the idea of personalisation. I will then provide some brief information about the new employment services model trials and consider whether those reforms will be enough to bring about the changes people have been asking for. We will then squeeze in some times with questions, and I will try to keep up with your chat as we're talking, if I can, and respond to any thoughts that come up during that. And don't worry if you don't get a chance to ask questions directly. We don't have an enormous amount of time. I'll be sending notes about this session around afterwards, and you'll be able to get my contact details and we can continue to have conversations that way. But before we start, let me introduce myself. I am Simone Casey, a research associate at Per Capita. I was volunteering at the Unemployed Workers Union for nearly a year in between jobs. And prior to that, I was at Jobs Australia for 14 years. And I also did a PhD about employment services. So first up, we're going to hear from Lisa, who will speak about what she thinks we need to do to fix the system. So Lisa, when you were putting together your notes on this, you talked about it being a system. So I just thought I'd kind of ask you about that.
Yeah, look, I think, you know, one of the traps for those of us who have been in and around or experienced employment services over many years is that we see the system as it is and we don't think about the system in its wider context of what the underpinning principles are. So, you know, and I know that you guys will talk a lot about the individual experience of it and the way that markets shape provider performance and what that means for how it functions. But I guess I want to sort of step back a little bit and just think about what the underpinning architecture of the system is. So ultimately, I would say that employment services, the way we structure them, are based on this hassle and help principle. The underlying idea is that if you apply pressure to unemployed people, you give them a little bit of help, eventually the market will deliver them into employment. And we don't really need to worry about the quality of that employment, about career progression or any of those things, because the market will take care of that too. And it's that thing that I think in this period of COVID-19, we have the opportunity to try to challenge and to try to shift. So it's that sort of underlying architecture that I think is a real problem. And what it's delivered to us is it's delivered to us a combination of skills shortages next to unemployment. It's delivered downward pressure on wages. It's delivered downward pressure on working conditions. So we have underemployment soaring and likely to become even more entrenched post-COVID-19. And we have this skills mismatch. So we have the best educated young people in terms of tertiary qualifications, but so many of them are sitting in jobs that don't use their skills. So this sort of crude market position where the whole focus is on the unemployed person and sort of fixing them and addressing them, because it doesn't think about demand, it doesn't think about the broader labour market, it's totally flawed. So in 5 minutes, what would I change? So first of all, I would reorient a system so that it helps to equip people for a labour market that is increasingly skilled. Now that is more than just add skills, because we can see from the number of tertiary educated people sitting in jobs that don't use their skills, it's not just a question of educating people more, it's about integrating the skills piece and the employment piece. We've got to have a system that helps people find jobs that use their skills and work for them. So and this comes to the personalisation piece, but it's about prioritising not just any job, but the quality of that job. I think we need to guarantee people a job within a certain period of time. I think, you know, the human wastage of people sitting outside the labour force who have the capability and the desire to work is enormous. And we can see this, the health consequences, the social consequences of that down the track. So I think a job guarantee of some sort, direct public sector employment, is critical going forward. I think we need to think more about hiring practices. Now, some of the stuff around social procurement starts to do some of this work. And those of you who've been in the disability sector know this, right? Because this is all about saying there are many employers out there who do not employ young people, who do not employ people with disabilities unless they fit into certain categories, who put artificial qualification requirements on their jobs that really have nothing to do with the jobs themselves. We need a system that starts to engage and challenge those sorts of issues on the demand side. So we need a system to do that. And it needs to form, whatever we do in employment services, it needs to be part of a wider strategy to promote access, availability to high quality, secure jobs, particularly in poorer communities, particularly in places that are far away from the wealthy parts of our country, regional, remote. So in terms of what it won't do, I'm going to rely on others to, what it shouldn't do, I'll rely on others to talk about that. But I guess the fundamental principle is it should not rely on the market to deliver people a life they have reason to value and to deliver us what we should expect as citizens of what is an enormously wealthy country.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa. And I really do agree that there's so much that we need to do on the demand side and creating these jobs that, in my view, it's far more important than what we do on the activation side. In fact, I'd like to see all that money that's spent on activation shifted that demand side job creation approach, and we're a really long way away from doing that. There were a couple of things on your list that I just wanted to go through that you think that we need to get rid of in employment services. So I'm just going to read those out because I thought it was quite a good list. And you said, we shouldn't rely on fear and coercion. We shouldn't rely on market mechanisms to deliver what is in essence a public good. And we shouldn't be operating separately from the skills and the education agenda. And it shouldn't be functioning to feed the precarious labour market. And all of those things that you listed there, I think they're really coming home to roost in what we're seeing with the COVID economic shock and the people who've been made most vulnerable to unemployment because of that. So, you know, it's this precarious employment situation. It starts with employment services and the jobs that they're referring people to at that contingent level of the labour market.
The ability to resist being forced into a job that is exploitative, that condemns you to poverty, that doesn't use your skills, that ability underpins the fragmentation, the inequality that we see in our labour market.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, look, I'm going to move on to May now. And so, May, would you like to talk to your top 5 things about the things that employment services should not do that they currently do?
Yeah. So my remarks are focused on the way that services have increasingly been defined and prescribed by the terms of the job active contract. When employment services were first outsourced comprehensively in the mid-90s, the rationale for doing that was that we were going to get a variety of innovative and exciting, responses to solve problems of unemployment on a localised basis according to the specialisation of providers. We didn't get that. So the job active contract as it currently stands sets out in extraordinary detail, not just the basis on which providers get paid, but how the services will be delivered. So we've lost all of that sort of adaptive capacity of our system. So my top 5, and I'm going to talk fairly quickly because it'd be great to have time for questions. Stop delivering services that are scripted by computer information process flows. These are all nitty-gritty things, but they affect hundreds of thousands of people going through the system. So workflows for employment advisors are set up on the computer system whose information prompts and data recording requirements are designed around program guidelines and contract requirements. Some of that's about social security legislation. Some of it is prompts for the service sequence, defined typically by checklist options and the information that needs to be recorded and reported for providers to get paid and to be found compliant in their delivery of contracts. So we have a double layer of compliance, which is the unemployed person's compliance with their activity requirements, but the provider's compliance with those terms of contract. So 2, stop setting arbitrary job application target numbers. One of the compliance requirements is to ensure that activation policy is followed, and that means providers have to set a number of jobs in each claiming period so that the person qualifies for the job. The default number of applications is set at 20 per month. And administrative data that Simone's dug out tells us that 56% of job plans have people's job search requirements set at the maximum of 20 per month. This is regardless of local labour market conditions. There's been a lot of analysis that shows us that the ratio of available vacancies to the number of people unemployed and looking for them varies vastly between areas and regions, but this arbitrary job search target requirement is ludicrous in those sorts of conditions. So number 3, stop requiring job search training for people who already know how to look for a job. And this goes to the business model for job active providers. And I remember this, when the job active contract came out, the providers were in a scramble to work out what group activities they could organise to get the maximum number of hours of attendance and participation requirements for the minimum dollar. So what do? You put people into group settings for training. The unit costs of service are obviously cheaper for group activities, but research with job active clients or people in the system trying to get help shows that they get caught up often in job search training that is reported by them to be unhelpful, patronising, and fails to recognise that they have indeed already become very professional at job search over many years. And I think an important sort of concept for us to understand about the job services system is that we are really requiring and compelling people to do a vast amount of work. And even though they're not getting paid for that work, that is a lot of hours of human resource that is being deployed that is just wasted and unproductive. Number 4, stop employing advisors that don't have much life and work experience. And this is just a function of the way contracts have got cheaper over time, caseloads have gone up, and as I've explained, the service process is prescriptive. So, you know, the industry in a general way has tended to become deprofessionalised. So the Unemployed Workers Union has done research showing that a common problem with serious implications for morale is that unemployed people who've worked for a long time are sometimes being seen by people without much life or work experience and little knowledge of the industry or skill area of people looking for help. And what that can mean is that people can tend then to hide behind the rules and just, you know, get their power not from professional expertise but from their ability to just pull the levers on that compliance reporting, you know, requirements of job search, etc. We understand that that relationship is not an equal service relationship. It's hard for people to complain or look for change of advisor because they don't know what the mysterious information being recorded on those screens is when they sit in appointments, and they don't want it to come across as difficult. Number 5, stop reporting people for compliance failures that result in payment cancellation, and the poverty and hardship don't need to be explained to this group. David, I think you're going to talk about this one, but on my list is also to stop calling people who are unemployed job seekers. It's a sort of Orwellian wishful thinking, a scripting of the role that people have, and it reduces their full humanity to a limited and prescribed role in relation to their value to the state and what society requires of them. So David, I hope you'll talk about that a little bit more. That's me.
Thanks, May. And if David doesn't, I will. So I'll give, I was just going to comment on that actually, this whole use of the job seeker, job maker, job keeper, job whatever. You know, it's just this sort of rhyming language that, you know, nonsense language that we've sort of walked into these days. I heard somebody talking about being a job wanter, and I actually thought that was a good change in emphasis, but I think probably we need to sort of change the language completely. All right, so now, David, it's your turn. You're gonna take a slightly different approach to the others, so let's hear what your thoughts are.
Thanks. Well, I only want to make one rule, and that would be that we start with the assumption that unemployed workers want high quality employment services. 96% of participation reports are for not turning up to provider appointments and activities. And not turning up for an appointment does not equal not wanting a job. We know from a range of health and human services that when you systematically understand the end user's experience of a service, it can improve service delivery. We know this from medical clinics, hospitals, child and adolescent services, residential care. Now, at the moment, the star rating system is currently the only external mechanism by which employment providers can be judged. Now, I talk to hundreds of unemployed workers, and it's rare to find one that knows their provider's star rating, and usually when they do, they think it's nonsense, and that's the polite term. We need a system to help unemployed workers judge the quality of a provider and to be given free rein to use their market power to shop around for one that is genuinely going to help them get a job. Now, there's a word of caution here. We don't want to measure satisfaction. That's too hard. And it depends on too many things outside the control of the provider. What we want to measure is experience. You know, what happened and what did you think of that? I think satisfaction is the wrong consumer measure to use in human services, and it's used far too often. Measure experience. It's more straightforward, and it's also practical information that providers can use to make changes. There's no point in getting and giving feedback if the provider can't use it. So this means your rating scale has to be robust. If it's not, then people will just deflect to arguments about the rating scale, especially if it tells them they're not doing a very good job. I mean, that's just human nature. A rating scale has to measure things that are important, not to the provider, because providers will want to avoid the difficult topics, but things that are important to a consumer, because this is a scale that you want them to use and to trust. So how do you find out what's important to unemployed workers? Well, fortunately, the Unemployed Workers Union did a survey late last year, and thanks to Simone for the heads up about it. 758 people did that survey, and statistically that's a good size sample. The AUWU were very generous in allowing me to do some quantitative analysis of the data, as well as some qualitative analysis of the more than 1,200 responses to the survey's open-ended questions. Now, I haven't got time to go into the methodology, but we have a paper that's been submitted for publication that has all these details. What we were searching for was a smaller set of underlying factors in that large set. In other words, what was driving the answers. And what we found was 6 qualities that are important, and I'll describe them briefly. Wait for the publication for more details, or if we have time at the end, I can answer some questions. Now, the 6 qualities pretty much in order of importance are: first, unemployed workers want their provider to be useful. And currently they're not doing a good job on that. Now, it's possible that useful is 2 separate qualities, skillful and knowledgeable, and we're doing some more research to find that out. The second quality is to be client-centred, and providers are also not doing very well on that. The third is to be responsive to feedback, not good at that either. The fourth is to be trustworthy. And now that's a complex quality to describe and kind of needs a whole session to explore. The fifth one was to be fair. And while there's some recognition that providers are cogs in an unfair system, some caseworkers give the impression of enjoying their power a bit too much, and May referred to that previously. In other words, they're bullies. And there's a culture within employment services that either turns a blind eye or even supports that. Now, that's something that providers, and more importantly, the Department of Employment, could fix in a day. Simply say there is no place for bullies in employment services and mean it, and then follow it through. Now, the final quality was to be friendly. Now, I mean, we're talking about a human service after all. And this is the area that seems to get the least unfavourable ratings. I couldn't say good ratings, but least worst. But, is this really the most important quality? I don't think so, and I don't think unemployed workers think so either. We're useless, but we're nice isn't, in my view, a great strapline. What we're doing right now is running a pilot with the AUWU to test if these categories are valid and reliable, and if they can be turned into a useful rating scale. And hopefully we'll have some results to share soon. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. And I'm really excited about this survey and the rating scale that will be developed out of it. So we'll definitely be sharing information with everybody as that progresses and becomes credentialed. So I think it's a great initiative and well done for that work. Now, I feel like we're running out of time. I'm not 100% exactly what time we're going to get kicked back into the other room. Afsa, we've got 5 minutes?
Yeah, just
5 minutes.
Warning.
Yeah,
4 minutes
okay.
now.
Yeah. So what I might do now, I did have some more content to go through, but I'm just going to make a few quick remarks and then respond to some of your questions. So I think what we've kind of been hearing here is some of the concerns that have been raised about the lack of personalisation of employment services. And that lack of personalisation is partly tied to the problem of privatisation. I've been noticing as we've been chatting that some people have been talking about privatisation. So what I wanted to do is ask a question and ask people to comment if they think that privatisation is the cause of the problem with personalisation. And if privatisation is the cause of that problem, how we could improve the arrangements for employment services to overcome that problem. There was also a question I've seen come up a couple of times about training. How can we make sure that unemployed people, unemployed workers can get training that they want and need? So first of all, while I'm looking for somebody to respond to the question on training, to ask the question on training, I'm just going to throw just anyone on the panel to respond to the question about privatisation and personalisation. So who'd like to have a go on that?
So I'll quickly, so we've got a combination of privatisation and continual downward movement on fees and services. But I have to say that, you know, for me, underpinning this system, you know, bullying is almost inevitable in a system that says whether or not jobs are there, we're going to force you to do a whole lot of things to fix yourself and to try to look for those jobs. So while the system can be improved, the underlying assumption is, as I said, hassle and help, with the emphasis on hassle. And in that environment, hassle's actually pretty cheap to do for an organisation, and it's much easier than helping. So it's the combination of privatisation and this architecture around hassle, surveillance, administering people to get jobs that aren't there. You know, that's the dilemma.
Yeah. Any comments from David or May?
I think Lisa's kind of said it all, really.
Okay. All right. Well, then I have a question from Michelle Moran about the lack of relationship between job active and training providers. Now, this is a thorny one. It's been around pretty much as long as I can remember. When those relationships have existed, they've often just been sort of referred to own entity, for profit, kind of making another way. So do any of the panel members have a view on how we could improve the access to training for young unemployed workers? Or Michelle, you could unmute yourself and explain. I'm just looking for you in the list.
I'm here.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I mean, I've been out of the workforce now for quite a while, but having come from a TAFE background and being in the group training industry as well, I mean, one of the big issues was, of course, there was a problem with labour market programs back in the 90s, in that we ended up pushing a lot of people into training who came out with lots of bits of paper, but that didn't necessarily guarantee a job. But the other side of the issue is that now we have a situation where it's very difficult for an unemployed person to access training, mostly because of the terrible, New Start cash allowance, and also because job providers don't seem to want to assist people, and they're not being given the money to direct people towards appropriate kinds of training. I mean, we had a very successful group training company. We were able to put young people into apprenticeships and traineeships, and I think that is part of the solution. I think there's got to be a revival in group training, and that will help unemployed people. But right now, private providers are completely disregarding the need for supported training and education to assist people to get back into the workforce. And I guess that's what I see as being at the bottom of it, apart from the fact that we're dealing with private providers who are more concerned with their return on investment than they are with an actual human outcome, because they want to keep churning people through the system.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of goes to the whole thing on incentive structures for privatised agencies and how those are set up and they drive the behaviour. And I'd say over the last 20 years of employment services history, we've never been able to get the incentive structures right so that the focus is actually on the needs of the unemployed worker. Now, I've just been advised we've been extended by another 5 minutes, so May's got your hand up, so you can go first.
And I preemptively put myself on unmute as well. Michelle, you make some really fantastic points about the problems that we have in the system. I mean, it's crazy that we have a lot of adults who actually would really seriously benefit from the development of core skills. But the rules under the job active contract actually mean that advisors are not and not allowed to refer people to training unless there is an explicit, direct vocational outcome of that training. Now, that's a chicken and egg scenario and a problem, because employers will say, yes, I will employ that person if they get through our screening and selection criteria once they're, through, so that where there could be directly relevant and valuable either core skills as a pathway or vocational skills, they don't get, they don't get referred because of risk-averse providers and the narrow interpretation of those rules and the inability to guarantee an outcome and the lack of will and effort in taking on contract managers to defend and justify that. So the baby has got caught up in the bathwater, and that's been confused and muddied by the shocking behaviour of churn in training, with lots of bits of paper, as you say, going around, courses with little, guarantee of relevant workplace experience, and therefore sort of poor outcomes from that as well, because the private vet market has been a schmozzle, which is now being at least recognised. Thanks.
Okay.
It's also about a system that is about short-term wealth, getting people short-term off benefits, as opposed to something that's geared to long-term resilience and an adaptive, smart labour force. So this disconnect between this, well, let's reduce the welfare bill and let's have a productive economy with well-trained workers, it just means that you defeat any attempts to try to connect the systems together to give people that training opportunity.
I think it's also a problem when you have a system that defines unemployed workers as throughputs and outcomes. And while we have a system that does that, then we will have policy failure continuing. We won't see any improvement in employment services until we start treating unemployed workers as active consumers that have a vested stake or a vested interest in this system actually improving. At the moment, we are forced into that narrative that if people are unhappy with coming up to their employment provider, that means that they're job shy, but not wanting to turn up for an appointment is not the same thing as being job shy. What we have been accepted almost is the narrative that the two things are the same. We have to separate that narrative completely. As I said before, 96% of participation reports are for people not turning up to appointments. People turn up for jobs.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you there, David, but we've got about 1 minute before we're going to get switched back to the other room. So it's obvious by the way this conversation's kicked off, there's a lot more to talk about. There's a lot more detail that we could go into on various elements of the employment services system or systems, and we really like to continue to have that conversation. And we will be having that conversation face-to-face in Canberra on the 30th of September to the 1st of October for the Full Employment Summit. But as I said, any questions you have after this, I'll be sending out notes and you can get back to me and we can continue the conversation that way. And we've got 13 seconds. So Richard Bentley, you've had your hand up. So if you can speak in 7 seconds, 6, I think we're going to run out of time. So with that, I'll just say thank you so much for joining us, and let's